Hi everybody, thanks for joining today. I'm Jason Gumpert from MSDynamicsWorld.com and I am really pleased to welcome you to today's session all about AP automation for Dynamics GP. Our presenter today is Mike Goldenberg, VP at MineralTree, and it's great to have him back. As we get started, please do know that we welcome your questions, and I know Mike will be leaving time at the end for those. Look for the Q&A block to the right of the main presentation area. If you don't see it, just look to the upper right for a question mark icon, and that'll open that up for you as well. Enter questions in there at any point. Like I said, we'll hold on to all of those for near the end of today's session. So without any further delay, Mike, I'm going to open up your line, and welcome to the event.
Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Mike Goldenberg. I'm the VP of Sales here at MineralTree in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Welcome everyone. We look forward to going over, in particular, how for GP and GP users, you can really not only improve your accounts payable process, but also, in particular, help you drive more card spend onto credit cards. When you think about the bigger picture, we no longer live in a paper-based data entry world, but ultimately a lot of accounts payable processes and certainly a lot of the, people here today, we are still stuck to paper in certain ways. And really what MineralTree is trying to help people do is, evolve through that change and make your lives easier so you can hopefully focus on more important things than entering data and chasing paper around the office. But ultimately, when you think about the accounts payable process as it, currently exists today, again, there's a lot of time spent just manually entering in invoices and making sure they're all coded correctly, and in many cases creating POs and things like that. Then from there, once those invoices are coming in, you're still forced to chase around approvals. A lot of the people we speak to today are still walking invoices around the office. If not, they're chasing them around by email and constantly having to remind people, hey, can you approve that email? Can you reply back? They're spending their time going back and forth with, their controller, CFO, any sort of other approvers or people who are authorized to release payments in kind of a back and forth process, and that can be particularly difficult with GP, the way that it's set up. And then ultimately, even after that, they've got to send payments in a bunch of different ways, whether that's cutting checks by hand, and certainly we speak to, and a lot of our customers are still, heavy on check. A lot of people are trying to switch over to ACH, but that is a time-consuming process to collect all those account numbers and routing numbers, and a lot of people don't necessarily love the idea of being responsible for that information being sent around. And then, like we talked about, card payments is the big win that a lot of people are trying to focus on. So, but it's not easy right now to make card payments, because oftentimes you've got to call up to put a card on file, or you can do some recurring billing, but a lot of times you may not want that card to be on file and have it recurring. So ultimately, it's important that these payments, we're helping you to streamline that entire process from start to finish. A lot of people are working closely with their banks today, or American Express, or in general, just trying to find ways to move to more card spend because you're earning rebates, and why would you want to pay to send a payment when you can get paid for it? So again, in particular, today we're going to focus on the payment side, and when you're thinking about your ideal payment type, first and foremost, you need to understand what your vendors accept, and this is actually one of the biggest challenges a lot of people have is, they're either underestimating the amount of vendors that they can actually pay by card, or they're just not, again, it can be a very time-consuming process to get people set up for this. But ultimately, one of the things that MineralTree in particular helps with is the vendor onboarding process. And there's a balance, right? Because on the one hand, you're trying to drive towards more card payments so you can earn rebates and rewards and things like that. But alternatively, you don't want to impact relationships with your vendors. And so we work very closely with our clients to make sure that they're getting all their FedEx and UPS and Google and all these other kind of vendors that they can pay by card onto cards, but, for instance, aren't necessarily upsetting the relationship, with a primary vendor who they do a huge portion of their payments to. But you got to think about it, even if you're going from check to ACH, which is definitely an improvement, it's still going to cost you money to make each one of those payments versus whether you're doing your own card payments or leveraging some sort of virtual card program, which we offer here at MineralTree. In those scenarios, you are literally getting paid every time you pay a bill. And that's where it gets exciting, is that you can start to earn that money back. The other thing is you got to think about timing aspect. That's one of the benefits certainly of card-based payments. They're going to happen more quickly. You can precisely time them, and you don't have to worry about, in particular, any sort of settlement accounts or anything that are slowing down the payments. So you can make sure that you're not paying a bill late, but also not paying it too early in some cases. But in other cases, you may want to pay really early to get the early pay discount. But, the precise timing of it and being able to schedule those things and not have to remember to send them out at different times is what, is the real win. Of course, security, MineralTree is founded on the basis of security and avoiding fraud. That was the whole premise of the company when we first started. And we backed that up through a combination of creating segregation of duties and all sorts of things like dual-factor authentication to get in. We'll help you in terms of supporting positive pay with your bank to ensure that even when you're doing check payments, you're avoiding fraud there. And we do actually provide guarantees against fraud as well. And the last thing, and this is where a lot of people have gotten stuck, is just, the ease of use. The reason people are still sending so many checks is because they're easy. Easy from the perspective of everyone accepts it, and everyone's kind of used to doing them. But ultimately, and this has been one of the reasons people haven't moved to as many cards, is, they haven't been really integrated, these different payment types, to the accounting system, because that's where all the payments originate from. That's where they all need to be tracked back to. So again, that's really, and we'll get into it in more detail, where MineralTree helps out is not only will we help you get more rebates and rewards and all that, but on top of it, we're actually going to make the process itself easier to optimize your payments. The reality is, and I won't go into too much depth here, but every payment starts, or not every payment, I shouldn't say, but the majority of payments start, with an invoice that needs to be paid. And while it should be in our heads a simple process to receive an invoice, code it, approve it, there's a lot of little things that go in. And, on average, you're looking at $15 per invoice. If you're, best in class, super efficient processing, thousands of invoices per AP person, you may be driving that price down to, just under 10. But ultimately, when you do the math of it, and we help, we have a great ROI calculator on our website that you can help with, but ultimately, it's a lot more expensive than people, realize. And part of what we're trying to do by helping people improve not just their invoice processing, but their payment processing, is to drive down the overall cost of the solution. But the good news is, even though invoices cost a ton of money to process right now, there's good news. We can help. And a big part of that is, again, getting away from the data entry. That's a big part of, where we help. I mean, when you think of the evolution, when people went from general ledgers to Excel into accounting systems, those are all really data repositories more so than anything. And some people have built in some forms of automation, but ultimately you still have to enter a lot of data. You still have to chase around a lot of approvals. Whereas now with solutions like MineralTree, we're taking away a lot of that, really manual, tedious work that really doesn't add a ton of value to the business. And, oftentimes the people that, are in an AP clerk role or who are doing that data entry, those can be tough roles to fill sometimes. You can have turnover, there's training. Oftentimes those people would prefer to be working on other things. So we really help people get away from that. So instead of focusing on entering the data, you can focus more on just reviewing it and turn your attention to more important things. When you look at check payments, it's mind-boggling, the amount of money, and we'll get into this in more detail, that's being spent, on check payments. I mean, even if a lot of people look at it as, the cost of the check stock and a stamp and an envelope, but ultimately, to support the check payments, often people are doing additional printing, you've got to file things, there's risk of fraud. I mean, it truly adds up. $5 is probably a conservative estimate, but ultimately, there's a lot more that goes into it. And again, the irony is that you have to pay $5 every time you pay someone, whereas, again, we're trying to help you get to a point where you get paid for paying that bill. And, if you look at in the U.S., 75% of the payments are still made by check. We see this on a regular basis still. And again, I understand why people do it, but there is a better way, and we are very quickly moving away from this. I mean, the other interesting thing is the amount of people that are still writing checks in their personal lives is actually a lot less than in businesses. But that is quickly changing, and we are, right at the forefront of that, because I think what people are realizing is that, there are billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that are being wasted, in these efficiencies. And so while a lot of larger enterprises have already moved away from checks to a large degree, and are taking advantage of these other payment types and payment programs, a lot of, middle-sized companies haven't, quite got there yet, but MineralTree really provides kind of the easiest way to get there. Because again, in our personal lives, we've moved away from electronic or from paper-based payments. I think, my wife's the only one still cutting checks as much as she can, but in general, everyone else has moved away from it. But, businesses lag behind, for a lot of different reasons. Again, it's a lot of things that are just in place, and ubiquitous in terms of people accepting it. But now, again, that's changed. Certainly MineralTree can help you with checks and ACH and make that a much easier, streamlined process and automate those for you. But the real win is moving over to either your credit cards or our virtual card program. And in both cases, again, a huge part of the value that, we're offering and adding is just in being able to onboard your vendors to make sure that you're optimizing how many of them you're paying through these methods. So in particular, you've got, we support wire transfers, both domestic and international, although at the moment we are limited to U.S. denomination wires. We've got an amazing partnership with Amex. Anyone who's an Amex corporate card holder, please, speak with your relationship manager there in terms of, so they, in some cases, depending on the circumstance and volumes, will even help subsidize some of the cost of MineralTree to drive more Amex payments. So really exciting partnership there. We're already seeing amazing results. But anyone who's, again, an Amex corporate card holder, speak with your relationship manager. They'll be familiar with MineralTree, and they can give you more details on, how we really help drive more spend onto those cards. Of course, we can do ACH, and one of the things that's unique about MineralTree is we work directly with your bank. We don't use intermediary settlement accounts. So we can send ACH payments directly from your bank, and your vendors will know exactly who it's coming from and how much it's for and things like that, and which invoices it's for. We're not quite there in terms of blockchain, but certainly I don't think most people here are probably processing much in terms of blockchain, but certainly something interesting to keep an eye on for the future in terms of payments. But the other program we highly are focused on is our MineralTree Silver Pay, which is a virtual credit card program. So ultimately, instead of it being your credit card, think of it as our card, and we're sending out one-time use credit cards for you to earn rebates on, but you don't even need to have it on your credit. It's on ours, but you still get all the benefits of rebates. And what's great about that is, we've got a network of over 500,000 vendors in the U.S. that are already set up to receive payments via SilverPay. So, right off the bat, we can show you the list of your vendors to give you a better sense of how much opportunity is out there for you already to start earning more money back. So how do we do it? Well, it starts, one of the things that's interesting is MineralTree actually started focused on the payment side of things and really being a secure way to send payments directly from your bank and then, relay that information back to accounting or to your accounting system. What's transpired over, call it the last 3.5, 4 years is what we realized is in order to have the right to make the payments, you've got to really address the front end of things, which is where the payment originates, which is oftentimes through an invoice. So within MineralTree, if you think about the process from paying you as the customer to the vendor, it starts with invoices getting entered into our system, and those come in either through email. Oftentimes, customers will just forward their email address or their AP email address to the one we've set up for them, or you can scan them into the system. Or because we have a two-way integration with the accounting system, if you create an invoice in the accounting system, it will automatically pull into MineralTree as well. So you're creating invoices at the front end. Once those invoices come into the system, then we are going through the process of capturing the data, both header and line level. And what's really great about this is a lot of people on the webinar are probably familiar with OCR technology and have both used it and hate it from the past because it's not very accurate and it does not work very well. And it's more, time and energy and work than it's worth. One of the wow moments people usually get is when they see our invoice capture work, because it's actually using a combination of technology as well as human intervention to ensure accuracy of data, and we're getting 99.5% accuracy. And this is really, again, where you go from data entry to data review. So we're capturing, again, both the header information as well as that line level detail. So especially if you're tracking your invoices and POs and things very closely, this will be critical for you to be able to have that quality of data. But what's really nice is in a company, and this is, I'd say, the majority of our customers, have some mix of purchase orders and non-PO based invoices. And so for the PO based invoices, you're going to be able to match them in our system and be able to push those back to GP fully matched and have that PO associated to the invoice in the system, so you get that really good tracking. But alternatively, for the invoices that are non-PO based, you'll be able to send them through an approval flow and associate any sort of coding that you've set up either by default or you can code them on a one-off basis. In the case of when we're doing PO match, of course, we'll pull over the coding that's associated to the PO. And, ultimately then you've got your invoices approved either through a PO matching process in our system or through just routing through approvals through the system in general. What's really nice about this is, again, instead of walking around the office and sending emails and tracking and pulling together all these different ways to track your invoices and approvals, you're going to have them all in MineralTree in one place. When the auditor comes around, your life's a million times easier because it's already all in one place. You got the full trail there ready to go, and life is good. But once you've got your invoices approved, then, think of invoice approval as just the goods and services have been received, so they're okay to pay from that perspective. But ultimately, then you still have payment authorization, which is, again, typically your controller, CFO, CEO, whoever else is involved, to actually say, yes, release those payments, and to determine when those are released. And so we set up, we can set up different rules and limits and things like that. We can do dual signatures. it's, we can really make sure that all the rules that you have in place are being tightly controlled and are actually in place, and, obviously trying to avoid any sort of fraud issues, things like that. A lot of people we talk to, have some sort of process, for instance, for ACH, where they're uploading a file to the bank. But ultimately, if that file can be altered before it's uploaded, there's potential for risk there. Whereas with our solution, we're sending those files directly to the bank, so there's no opportunity for adjustments, after they've been approved. So once those payments have been authorized for payment, then we're sending the check, ACH, wire, or card-based payment, depending on which one you've selected. We don't use any settlement accounts, so the check comes, has your company name on it, your signatures, and it looks like it's coming from you. If the vendor does not cash the check, it does not come out of your account. So it's just a lot easier than a lot of our competitors who leverage settlement accounts, where they're taking a bulk debit from your account, putting it into their account, and then dispersing those funds. In our model, things are all sent direct. In terms of ACH payments, we're pushing them directly from your bank. Again, they're coming from you. It's easier for a vendor to understand who it's coming from and what it's coming for. And again, card-based payments, whether that's your Amex card or our SilverPay program, or a combination of the two in many cases. You're really optimizing those payments. And then we're sending both remittance, and this is critical as well, sending remittance to your vendors so they know what they're being paid for more specifically. And also then we're syncing back to GP that the invoice has been paid, and the payment details, whether that's the check information or card or ACH, it doesn't matter. You've got that detail right back in the accounting system. So what we're ultimately trying to accomplish is, if you think about your typical AP process, and candidly speaking, it may be more than 12 steps for a lot of people, because while it seems like a simple thing, it often becomes even more complex. We're trying to cut it down to really, you're doing more verification and approvals, you're queuing up payments, and then they're being authorized. But we're really getting rid of a lot of the data entry, the chasing around, the filing, and ultimately, making you more efficient to focus on more important things, with the end goal of being to help you, scale without having to hire additional people. Oftentimes our customers are looking to consolidate multiple locations, certainly reallocate staff to more valuable activities than data entry and chasing people for approvals, and certainly any organizations that are just focused in general on efficiency and scalability, and those companies are the ones that see the most value. And when you think of the industries and things that we're focused on, we're somewhat agnostic. But we tend to see customers who are fast growing, who see a ton of value, manufacturing, senior living, nonprofits who are really focused on trying to make the most of their dollar, like Appalachian Mountain Club, the oldest outdoor institution in the country. Those are the ones who really see the most value in our solution. So with no further ado, what I'm going to do is actually go into the product itself and provide a quick demonstration of what it looks like in more detail. Just bear with me for 1 second. All right, so within MineralTree, we're going to focus on the two main roles within our system, which are the accounting manager role and the payment authorizer role. So the way the MineralTree works is you can have unlimited numbers of users in any given system. We don't charge by user. So you may have multiple people in this account manager role, but think of your AP specialist, your accounting manager, your AP clerks, anyone who is focused on the invoice processing and approvals and coding. These people will typically be in this accounting manager role. There's a separate role, which we won't really get into as much detail on here today, which would be just the invoice approval role. So that's more your department head, whoever is responsible for just confirming goods and services have been received. This is, again, think of your accounting staff using this more. So when they come in, one of the great, things they'll have visibility to right off the bat is just bank cash, and we can pull in from multiple banks through integration. So you'll have visibility to what's actually in the bank. Also, we can bring in card balances as well, so it just gives you a nice high-level view for cash purposes. Also, visibility to general ledger cash, which is coming from GP itself. Then you'll notice below we've got an aging report of the outstanding invoices that are in the system, as well as payments in process, as well as recent payments that have been made. So just a high-level view of what's going on in terms of AP, but the majority of the time will be spent by your teams in the Invoices tab. And so this is going to show your entire list of unpaid invoices. In many cases, so you've got your list of vendors here, outstanding balances remaining, the due dates of them, visibility to any attached documentation, obviously the scanned image of the invoice is usually what's there, and then a visibility to approvals on these invoices, as well as any notes and invoice numbers. Also, oftentimes you may be wanting to, especially if you've got a larger volume of invoices, you may want to narrow down on a certain group. So there's a couple ways to do that. If you were looking for unpaid invoices or invoices that have just come in and just been captured and that are still in draft form, you can see them here. Or through our advanced search functionality, you actually have the ability to narrow down on different groups. This becomes especially helpful again, when dealing with larger volumes of invoices where maybe you want to queue up a bunch of payments at one time or really narrow down on one particular group at once. So before I go into the details of an actual invoice, I just want to give a better sense of, some of the automation that can be set up here. So at a vendor level, you can automate. So we're bringing in the vendor card information from GP automatically, so there's no need to add or do any sort of dual entry here. We'll bring in any sort of account numbers, so certainly if they're doing ACH, we'll bring that in for you. We can set up default payment types so that you always pay. If you want to send ACH, you always send ACH. You can send multiple remittance emails to make sure that your vendors are notified of when they're receiving payments. You can determine what's on your checks. Obviously, that can be, important and, helps ensure that people actually get the checks and cash them versus, again, some of our competitors who use settlement accounts, it looks like the payment's coming from them, not from you, so it can be confusing for the vendors. But you can also set up default expense accounts, AP accounts, terms, and also manage approvers. You can set up multiple invoice approvers here, and you can also set up different levels of approvers by dollar amounts. And you always have visibility at a vendor level to look into unpaid as well as recent payments for that vendor. So, and again, this all comes down to if you want to get more spend onto cards, you need to have a better way to, have it all be one process and one fluid way of both approving your invoices and paying them. All that being said, one of the nice things for MineralTree, and certainly for those who like to take things in pieces, if for some reason you wanted to start with the invoice side and then go to payments, or for whatever reason wanted to start with payments and then, move into getting more help on the invoice side, you can break the product in pieces a bit. but truly to take advantage of and really optimize your payments, it does help to have them all in one place. But when you're thinking about getting invoices approved, as you're in this tab, so you'll see there's a lot of these invoices in draft form. This means that these invoices, before we actually push them back to the accounting system to GP, we want typically to have you review them before they post back. And what's unique to GP is a lot of people like to have their invoices approved before they actually put them into GP, because it can just be a pain to try and change things once it's in GP. But if you wanted to, you could post, a group of them back all at one time, or you could go into them individually, and once, they're approved the way you want, you can post them back to GP. We'll still respect the batching process within GP. So even once you post them back to GP, you'll still have to confirm them through the batching. That's, a limitation or control of GP. But either way, again, one of the things people usually really like about this product is they can, continue to approve things and have visibility to them without necessarily having them in GP yet, which is nice. But when these invoices come in to MineralTree, again, they'll show in this draft form. And then let's take a look at, for instance, an invoice that has a PO associated to it. You can see it's associated because you can see there's a mismatch in terms of this PO. So the Staples invoice came in, we go into it, and this invoice, from Staples, you can see the header level, you can see PO number here. We're capturing all this header level information as well as the line levels. So as you scroll down, you'll see we've identified the PO number. Also, what's really helpful is any invoice you have, even if they didn't reference the PO number, you'd be able to search on POs for that vendor here. So that's usually very helpful for people because sometimes the vendor doesn't remember. So again, we're capturing this header level information, invoice numbers, dates, due dates, terms, invoice amounts, as well as the actual line level information. And so you can see here we've got our quantity of 15 Post-it notes, things like that. This has been associated to a PO. And so ultimately what you're doing today is you're selecting the invoice that we're matching it to, and then you've got to just line them up. So you can see here, this is our Post-it note 1, this is line number 1. And so we'll just go ahead and link this, and then it's linked both in MineralTree, and then when it syncs back to GP, it will be linked there as well. And so today, in terms of PO matching, again, you're still lining up and matching each line, but we're excited as we go into Q1, we'll be releasing the ability to do exception flagging. So we'll actually start to match these up. And then when you come in, you'll see that the ones that are matched will already be matched, and then the ones that aren't, you would then still do manually, but that should take even more work off your plate. But either way, today, this is a huge help. I mean, people are doing this in some shape or form, but now you have one consistent process for both your PO-based invoices as well as the non-PO-based ones. For a lot of people, if it matches, what's received, billed, everything, then there's no extra approvals required. But in some cases, they may want to get another approval, and so you can always add an approver here, which is helpful as well. And you can also set it up to say if there's mismatches, then send it to an approver also, and you can put in notes to that person to then explain to them, what the confusion is or what needs to be fixed. So you'll, go through your different invoices and you'll be matching them and, looking for approvals. So, for instance, if this was green here, you may say, okay, now we're good to queue this up. We don't need additional approvals. You can see here for approvals, this one, it's in green, so that's been approved. This yellow one is waiting approval, and there'd be a red one if one was rejected here. But ultimately, once you've built up a list of invoices that you want to be paid, then you're simply queuing them up here to go over to the payment authorizers based on the rules you've set up. So you've created this queue of payments for these invoices. If you had multiple invoices to a single vendor, we'd consolidate it so you don't have to send 20 checks to the same person. There's no limit to the number of checks, or I'm sorry, there's no limit to the number of invoices paid on a given check, which can be really helpful to people. What's nice is you can, again, precisely time those payments, whether that be to take advantage of an early pay discount, or you want a payment to arrive at the beginning of a month versus the end of this month. You can always do that. But if you don't set a date, it'll just send it the next day for you. But assuming these look like the payments you want to queue up, you'd simply confirm the 3 payments, do a last double check in terms of what accounts you're paying them from, payment type, and then you'd submit the payments, which is notifying your payment authorizer that there's payments to be released. The other really nice thing, you've got now your digital file cabinet. Instead of having to dig into the file cabinet every time a vendor has a question, you can find those invoices here at any time. So that usually makes your life a lot easier. Again, for auditing purposes, everything's tracked in one place. You can download reports too if you need to. And then we also have reporting in general, so there's a slew of different reports that we've got pre-built for you, but also if you need anything in specific, we can actually build custom reports as well. So for instance, you may want to track your credit card stuff here, just to get a sense of how much spend you're actually moving to cards, but just one example. So now we'll go ahead and move over to the payment authorizer view. And so again, think of these people as the check signers. Again, we can support dual signatures and any sort of rules and limits that you have. If you want to have 2 people need to approve, or 2 out of these 3 people need to approve, or whatever it may be, we can support those without a problem. So when you go to log in, you'll notice the dual factor authentication, which we're supporting, which is a critical security measure. You can set this up either at the time of login or at the time of payment release, or not at all, but we highly recommend it just as a security protocol, so that you need to know, or someone would need to know, both the password of MineralTree, but also would need to have a cell phone, the cell phone of the payment authorizer in hand. So obviously, great protection against fraud. Payment authorizer is going to have a very similar view of bank cash and general ledger, payments in process and things, but they'll also see, instead of an aging report, the payments that are awaiting their approval. And so when they come into this view, they can either approve all. If these look like some really straightforward, basic bills, then they could approve them all from a chairlift or the beach or whatever and make their life easier. Or more than likely, they may want to double check on some of these things. And what's really great is what I was saying in terms of being able to see the whole trail. So they can see who submitted the bill. They can see if it's been approved and the status of it. They can change payment dates if need be. They can see what payment type we're going to use, and they can even see recent payments to the vendor to say, hey, wait a minute, we just paid a bill for this exact amount. Like, it looks like we're about to do a duplicate, although we do have ways of identifying duplicates too. But either way, it can avoid a lot of issues in terms of that. They can see any sort of notes that were included for them about this invoice. They can see how it was coded here. And then if there was a scanned image of the document, you'd see it here as well. So they have all that information at their fingertips without you having to print it all up and give it to them. And again, for auditing purpose, can always go right back to it. So if the payment looks good, you would just approve it, and it would just take them right to the next invoice to then approve. And so if everything, or if there was an issue here, they could reject it again to this segregation of duties, send it back to the accounting manager to say, hey, wait a minute, there's no document attached here, or I want to see additional documentation, and then it will send it back to the accounting manager to make the adjustment. But assuming everything looked good, they could just proceed to confirm all bills, one last check to make sure everything looks right, and then clicking the submit button will actually kick off the process to make the payments on the back end, whether that's check, ACH, wire, or the different card payment options. So similar to the accounting managers, they'll have views of the file cabinet, if you will, as well as reporting. So that concludes, that concludes the demonstration portion, of the presentation. I think we were hoping to set some time aside at the end here to answer any, more specific questions that anyone may have, and give you guys a better sense of, some of the details and things that may help you in your decision-making process.
All right. Thank you, Michael. And so to anyone in the audience who still has a question that they haven't asked, please do enter that now into the Q&A block or the chat, and we will get to as many of those as we have time for. We do have a few that have already come in. Mike, the first question, how does card payment sync to Dynamics GP?
So what will happen is, as soon as we send that, that card payment on in the back end, it will then sync back to the accounting system. It will mark that invoice as paid, and it will put in for payment details the card number. And so what's interesting is the way that we're sending card payments. So for instance, with both American Express as well as with our own Silver Pay program, we're sending what are often referred to as virtual cards or ghost cards or one-time use cards. So it allows us to send those numbers securely. It's a one-time use card for a certain amount that is only good for a certain amount of time, that can only be run one time. So it's a more secure way to do it, but then we're syncing that, those details back to GP. It would still go through the batching process to push that back, but ultimately it would, you'd have those details right there.
Okay. Does MineralTree enroll our vendors? Does MineralTree verify who accepts cards?
Yep, so that's a huge part of the value that we provide, is just visibility to which vendors. So we'll either work directly with Amex to go through your vendor list and determine exactly all the vendors that accept, or same thing through our virtual card program, which runs on MasterCard rails. You will essentially match your vendor list from the last 12 months to the list of accepting vendors. And so that'll be kind of your initial jumping off point of vendors that you can pay through the system. But also then we proactively are onboarding additional vendors as we go, with a focus obviously on the higher value ones. So we'll constantly, we work together in terms of doing it, because this is somewhat of a sensitive subject for people, because they want to be careful they're not paying certain vendors by card for whatever reason. They've got some sort of highly negotiated price or whatever it may be. So we're constantly updating the list for you, but you still have control, but we'll constantly be building out that list of vendors for you to be able to get more spend onto those cards.
Okay, next question. How do I compare my card statement to the charges in GP?
So In terms of it depends which version you're using. So if you're using MineralTree's SilverPay program, again, it's not actually your credit card. So in that scenario, you'd be just seeing these card payments coming out like a debit, essentially. So each one individually, we'd be debiting your account for that amount. In the case of Amex, ultimately we'd provide you a report of all the payments that have been made, and you can use that, to further reconcile. But you're actually creating in the accounting system essentially like another bank account for the card, and then you're attributing it to that is the way it works.
Okay. So I see one more question here. I'll make a final call for anyone else in the audience who has a question to ask. Please enter that now. And the question is just asking, how is card information stored? Is it safe? Is everything about the card, 3-digit code, address, all stored in there?
So again, when we're sending cards, so for instance, we're not sending, when we do an Amex payment, we're not sending your actual, that number and that security code on the back of, the card that you have in hand. We work directly with American Express through our partnership to create a one-time use card that's being sent. And so, yes, it's extremely highly secure and it's even more secure than, being out there calling people with your card number, because you go to pay a vendor, you call up, you give them your card number, maybe someone writes it down somewhere. I mean, versus this, again, it's that one-time use card that can only be used one time for a specific amount by a specific merchant. So it's highly secure. In that respect, your card number is not all over the place. It's these one-time use cards.
All right, thank you, Mike. And I think that is the end of our list of questions here that have come in. So I think we can begin wrapping up. So thanks to everyone in the audience for those questions. And Mike, thank you for taking the time today.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always happy to answer, additional questions. If you go to our website, we've got people standing by who can set up times for you to learn more, because I know that a lot of times people want to really dig into the details of this stuff to make sure it's going to work with their specific process. So we're happy to take people through individual demos and really dive into their specific process to make sure we address all the details and nuts and bolts of it for you.
Excellent. Well, with that, we are going to wrap up today's event. We did record it. We'll be sharing that with all of you as well. That concludes the event. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.